While I was working a double shift in the ER on Christmas Eve, saving someone's mother, someone's husband, my own daughter was being told by my parents there was no room for her at the table. They didn't say it softly. They didn't hide it. They made her stand in the doorway in front of everyone and said, "This dinner is for family, not for strays." That's what they called my 16-year-old daughter. A stray. She had brought them gifts. She made her grandmother's favorite cookies. She even wore the dress they gave her last year. But none of it mattered. Because I wasn't there. And to them, that meant she didn't belong. So they let her leave. Alone. On Christmas. In the dark. She drove herself home, sat in a silent house next to a cold tree waiting for a mother who was busy stitching up strangers. She didn't cry when I got home. She just asked me one question: "Did I do something wrong, Mom?" No child should ever ask that. Not on Christmas. Not ever. So no, I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just left them a letter. And the next morning, my parents opened their front door to find it taped to the glass right where the wreath used to hang. Within 10 minutes, I had 40 messages. By noon, the entire family chat exploded. And by nightfall, my phone rang with one word: why. They asked why. I'll tell you why, and I'll tell you everything. My name is Serenity. I'm a single mom, a nurse, a daughter. But most of all, I'm a mother who will never let anyone make my child feel unwanted. Not even my own family. Before I share what happened next, I'd love to know you're here with me. Comment listening below, or just tell me where you're from. It helps more than you know. Thank you. Now, let me tell you everything. I stood quietly outside Lila's room holding the red sweater she had planned to wear on Christmas Eve. From the hallway, the faint smell of burnt cookies drifted in from the kitchen, clashing with the memory of a dinner we were never truly invited to. The hallway light flickered, casting long shadows across the worn floorboards. I stared at the sweater in my hands and thought, when did isolation stop feeling unusual and start feeling natural? I grew up in the suburbs of Asheville, North Carolina, in a family that worshipped being average. Not average in income or ambition, but in demeanor. The kind of family where being too different made people uncomfortable. In that house, a good kid was one who didn't ask for too much, didn't shine too bright, didn't remind anyone else of their own limitations. I loved science from the moment I discovered how a frog's heart keeps beating after it's removed. While other girls were drawing horses and braiding friendship bracelets, I was tracing diagrams of the human nervous system and memorizing Latin terms. I remember the day I proudly told my mother I had memorized all 206 bones in the human body. She looked at me like I'd announced I was collecting severed limbs and said, "Sweetheart, could you not bring that up during dinner?" Corinne, my older sister, was everything I wasn't: charming, talkative, the kind of girl who could stumble through algebra and still be elected student council treasurer. She was adored, effortlessly so. She could spill a drink and get a laugh. I could get straight A's and get called a show-off. She had a nickname for me, Dr. Freak, which she used liberally even in front of our parents. They didn't correct her. Sometimes they laughed. Then there was my father, Harold. He had a habit of making jokes that left small scars. Once, after staring at me for a long minute, he muttered, "You sure you're mine? You don't look like anyone else in this house." I was 9. The room went silent, and no one denied it. At family dinners, the unspoken hierarchy always held. Corinne sat beside our parents, laughing and spooning mashed potatoes onto everyone's plates. I sat near the end, closest to the kitchen, often forgotten when dessert was passed around. Eventually, I stopped expecting a slice and started clearing the plates before they were finished eating. It was easier that way. Years later, I got a full scholarship to study medicine at UNC Chapel Hill. My mother's response: "Doctors make good money, just don't forget where you come from." She said it like a warning, not pride. I worked nights as a server at a diner off Hendersonville Road. On more than one occasion, I limped back to my dorm with blisters on both heels and exactly $34 in tips, smelling like grease and fatigue. I met Ethan during one of those shifts when I was assisting in the ER for clinical hours. He handed me a granola bar after I nearly fainted during a 14-hour shift and asked, "Why are you doing all this alone?" No one had ever asked me that. It was the first time I realized I didn't have to. I graduated with honors. I texted the whole family to invite them to the ceremony. No one replied. Ethan showed up with a camera and flowers. He took the only photo I have from that day. Just me and him standing in the sun outside the auditorium, my face trying to smile past the ache. Now I watched Lila 16, and so carefully hopeful sitting at the kitchen table taping names onto cookie boxes we were sending to extended family. She had my curiosity, but not my armor. Her eyes still searched for affirmation. Still waited for someone to say, "You belong." I felt something tighten in my chest. Was I letting her walk into the same loneliness I had barely survived? 3 weeks before Christmas, my phone lit up with Corinne's name. I should have known better than to answer, but I did. Her voice started light sing-song almost. "Hey, Em, I've got something small to ask." That's how it always started. She went on about how Ivy, her daughter, had the chance to attend a prestigious STEM summer camp. "It's life-changing," she said. "But tuition's steep, $1 and $200. If you could spot me, it would mean the world to Ivy." I sat on the edge of the couch rubbing my temples. "Corinne," I said, "I'm already covering Mom and Dad's mortgage, their utilities, Dad's prescriptions, and I'm still paying off part of my medical school debt. I can't take on anything else." There was a brief silence on the line. Then her tone shifted. "You've always looked down on me, haven't you?" she snapped. "You think I'm a bad mom because I didn't go to college." Before I could respond, the call ended. Less than 10 minutes later, Margaret, our mother, called. "I don't know what your problem is," she said, skipping the pleasantries. "Your sister asks for help, and you act like she's asking for your kidney." I tried to stay calm. "Mom, I've paid over $30,000 the past few years just to keep you and Dad housed, insured, and healthy. That doesn't even include the emergencies." Margaret huffed. "You've always been jealous of your sister." I almost laughed. "I'm not jealous. I'm just tired of being the family's bank account." Later that night, scrolling through my messages in the hospital parking lot after a 12-hour shift, I came across a text from Mom. "We never should have let you go so far away to school. It changed you." My hands trembled as I read it again. The implication was clear. I had become too different, too distant, too unwilling to play the role they had assigned me. I wasn't their daughter. I was their ATM with a stethoscope. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Corinne's voice, Margaret's words, the coldness wrapped in familiarity. And then something new surfaced, an email thread from 3 months ago. Ivy had actually been awarded a scholarship to another camp that covered everything, but Corinne had declined it, saying it was too basic and not the one with prestige. So the $1, $200 wasn't about opportunity. It was about image, about proving something to the other moms at her yoga studio or whatever new group she needed validation from. I drove home the next morning, numb, my head pounding from fatigue and fury. Lila was at the dining table cutting out glitter stars and taping them onto handmade cards. "Should I write to Grandma or to Grandma and Grandpa?" she asked, holding up one of the cards with shaky penmanship and gold trim. I paused. My throat tightened. I wanted to protect her hope, her belief that people show up when it matters. "Write whatever you want, sweetheart," I told her. "Whatever feels right." She smiled, not realizing the storm that had begun swirling just beyond her paper stars. Lila had spent the entire morning getting ready. She wore the red sweater she'd picked out weeks ago, the one with the subtle silver thread woven through the collar. Her hair was pulled back neatly, her cheeks pink with anticipation. She loaded a tray of carefully packed cookies into the passenger seat and secured the wrapped gifts in a box behind her seat. It was her first time driving herself to Grandma and Grandpa's for Christmas dinner, her first time being treated in her eyes like an adult. "Text me when you get there," I reminded her as she headed for the door. She turned with a smile and gave me a thumbs up, then sent a heart sticker before pulling away. I watched her car disappear down the street, feeling that bittersweet mix of pride and unease only a mother understands. The house was quiet for the next few hours. Ethan and I worked our Christmas Eve shifts in the ER, our hands moving in sync with trauma rhythms, but my thoughts kept drifting to Lila. I imagined her setting the cookies on the table, handing out her little gifts, sitting beside Ivy like she used to when she was younger. I didn't get a text. When I walked into our house near midnight exhausted, I noticed the lights were still on. My heart caught in my throat. Lila's boots were by the door, wet from rain. She never left them there. My pulse quickened as I stepped inside. She was curled up on the couch, knees drawn to her chest, her red sweater wrinkled and slightly damp. The tray of cookies sat unopened on the coffee table. Next to it was a plate with a slice of burnt toast and half a banana. I knelt beside her. "Sweetheart," I whispered. "What happened?" She stirred but didn't sit up. "It's fine," she mumbled. "There just wasn't a seat." "What do you mean? They said the house was full. Grandma said there were too many people, no more room." Her voice cracked. "Ivy was sitting where I usually do. Grandpa was feeding her extra turkey and asking her about her science fair project." My throat tightened. "Corinne told me I should have called first," she added, eyes staring at a dark corner of the room. "So I left." She tried to say it with indifference, but her voice trembled on the last word. Then it broke altogether. I felt like one of those folding chairs people only pull out when there's no other option, then toss back into the closet. She turned her face away. I didn't want to be in the way. I pulled her into my arms. Her body shook against mine, and in that moment, every silent betrayal from my own childhood came crashing back. Every seat I wasn't offered, every slice of cake passed without thought, every joke made at my expense. But this time, it hadn't happened to me. It had happened to her. I tucked a blanket around her and watched her drift into a restless sleep. My gaze settled on the unopened box of cookies and the carefully labeled gifts beside it. Then I looked at the plate on the table, the pathetic dinner she made for herself alone. That night, something inside me hardened. I had spent a lifetime explaining, excusing, enduring. But if they couldn't make room at their table for my daughter, then they didn't deserve a seat at mine. Not anymore. The morning after Christmas, the house was still. Ethan and I sat at the kitchen table, the coffee between us growing cold. I stared at the list in front of me. Mortgage payments, electricity prescriptions, repairs. All of it paid by me. All of it for a house I didn't live in, for people who couldn't spare a chair for my child. What now? Ethan asked gently, his voice breaking the silence. I folded the list in half and stood. "Now," I said, "they get to understand what it feels like to be left out." I opened my laptop and began writing. The letter was brief, formal, and unmistakably clear. They had 60 days to vacate the property I legally owned. No more utilities. No more automatic pharmacy pickups. No more silently underwriting their comfort. I printed the letter, signed it with a firm hand, slipped it into an envelope, and drove it across town. At 7 a.m., I pulled into their driveway. No one was up yet, but the porch light was still on. I climbed the steps and placed the letter just inside the storm door. As I turned to leave, the curtain in the front window moved. Someone had been watching. By that afternoon, my phone rang. It was Margaret. Her voice screeched through the line. "You ungrateful brat. Do you know what you've done? You're tearing this family apart." I waited for the question that never came. Instead, I asked, "Did you apologize to Lila?" Silence. "Then she's too sensitive." I hung up. A few hours later, Corinne showed up at my gate with Harold trailing behind her, both of them still in wrinkled holiday clothes. She screamed across the yard. You're seriously doing this? To your own parents, I didn't come out. I watched through the blinds as Harold stood there unmoving. For once, he didn't echo Margaret's rage. He just looked tired. The messages began flooding in that night. Cousins, family friends, even a second aunt I hadn't spoken to in years. This is too much. You've crossed a line. Do you want this to ruin your reputation as a doctor? I created a new folder in my inbox and labeled it Evidence, just in case. Each message felt like confirmation. Not one of them asked about Lila. Not one of them said, "How's your daughter?" And that told me everything. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't miscommunication. They hadn't forgotten her. They had ignored her. And by doing so, they had reminded me yet again that in this family, care was conditional, love was lopsided, and worth was measured by convenience. Not anymore. This time, I was drawing the line, and I wasn't moving it back. It had been a full week since I'd dropped the letter at their door, long enough for silence to settle heavy and expectant. I was halfway through folding laundry when I heard the thud of a palm against the glass panel of my front door. "Open the damn door," Serenity Margaret's voice pierced through the hallway. I stepped toward the entryway, slowly, towel still in my hand. Her figure stood rigid on the porch, holding a crumpled envelope in one hand like it was a dead mouse. I opened the door but didn't step aside. "This, what you call, family. Now," she barked, jabbing the letter toward me. "You read it, I assume," I said. She laughed, a dry, cracked sound. "This isn't about Ivy. Don't pretend you're doing this to protect Lila. You just want to prove you're better than the rest of us." I didn't flinch. "This is about accountability." Her eyes narrowed, shifting to scan the house behind me as if looking for signs of weakness. "You're just bitter. You always have been." "Ivy's summer camp?" She snapped, suddenly changing direction. "You're still going to pay for it. You always have." I looked at her like she was speaking a foreign language. "Because I can doesn't mean I have to," I said quietly. I pulled out my phone and opened the spreadsheet I'd kept since the pandemic: 36 mortgage payments, prescriptions, property taxes, emergency roof repairs. A total of over $41,000 in 3 years. I held it up to her face. Her mouth moved, but no words came out. And on Christmas Eve, I continued. There were 28 people in that house. Neighbors. Friends. Friends of friends. But somehow no seat for my daughter. We just didn't think she began. "That's exactly the problem," I interrupted. "You didn't." She looked away, her hand shaking slightly as she held up the letter again. Then, without warning, she ripped it in half and let the pieces fall like ash to the porch floor. "You'll never have a real family acting like this," she spat, turning on her heel. I stood there unmoving, watching the broken paper dance in the breeze. But I didn't feel broken. "If a real family means letting a child eat toast alone on Christmas," I whispered after her, "then I'll pass." The next morning, I met with my lawyer. I handed over every document, every bank statement, every transfer receipt, and told him, "Make it official. No more support. 60 days. I want the house empty." He nodded. "We'll file today." By the time I got home, the kitchen smelled like cinnamon toast. Lila was sitting at the counter, swinging her legs and sipping hot chocolate. She looked up at me with those wide, still hopeful eyes. "Will they have somewhere to go?" I brushed a crumb from her cheek and said, "I don't know, baby. But I know this: you'll never be the one left standing again." The legal notice had been filed, the utilities disconnected, and the support payments frozen. What was once routine, my quiet, invisible lifeline to their survival, was gone. By noon, the house I had paid for went dark, its water stilled. And by evening, I had listed it publicly with a local agent, photos uploaded, priced fairly. Within 24 hours, 500 people had clicked to view it. And then came the retaliation. Corinne posted a Facebook story, a long, emotionally manipulative essay, framed with a picture of Harold and Margaret wrapping boxes under dim light, their expressions solemn and hunched. She raised us, it read. Now my sister throws her out like a stray dog, just before winter. The comments came fast. I can't believe Serenity would do this. She was always so ungrateful. Some people forget who loved them first. I scrolled through the thread at 2 a.m. while Lila slept peacefully in the next room, unaware of the storm growing in digital silence. By Wednesday, the whispers reached work. The head of my department called me into his office, his mouth tight, fingers drumming. There's been a complaint, he said, pushing a manila folder toward me. You're being placed on unpaid leave pending an internal review. I blinked. A complaint of what he avoided my gaze. Alleged misuse of authority for personal financial gain. Someone claimed you pressured a relative for property. We're obligated to investigate. For the first time in years, I felt heat behind my eyes. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just nodded, picked up my coat, and left. At home, I kept my composure for Lila. I made spaghetti. I asked about her new art teacher. I nodded when she said she'd made a friend named Quinn. But when the house was quiet and the dishes were done, I crawled into bed without brushing my teeth. Turned off the lights, and lay there in the dark. Everything I had built, the long nights in the ER, the surgeries, the conferences, felt like vapor. I remembered the night I delivered twins and missed Lila's 5th grade recital. I remembered stitching a homeless man's face for 4 hours only to arrive late to Margaret's birthday dinner and be told I wasn't trying hard enough. A ping lit up my phone. A message from Aunt Beatrice. Please stop. You're hurting the whole family. They're old. Let them be. I read it twice. The same Aunt Beatrice who held me when I scraped my knees. The one who once told me I was born with a spine made of sunlight. Now asking me to bend for peace. I didn't respond. I added the message to a folder on my desktop, evidence just in case. But what hurt more than any of that, more than the post or the investigation or the silence from colleagues, was this. Not a single message mentioned Lila. Not one person said, "How is she?" Not one asked if she was okay that night. In all their outrage, not one voice defended the child who stood in the cold with a gift bag and a smile waiting to be let in. And in that absence, I understood. They didn't forget her. They erased her. And now I was the only one left to remember her worth. The day after I was suspended, I picked Lila up early from school. She walked to the car with red-rimmed eyes and tangled hair. I didn't ask right away. I just waited until we were on the road, when she said softly, "Someone made a video of me. From Christmas?" They added captions. Funny ones. Not in a good way. I gripped the wheel harder. I didn't need to ask which video. She whispered, "They called me the girl who wasn't invited to Christmas." A group of classmates had taken footage from my parents' security cam, the same one that caught her outside that night, and edited it into something viral enough to circle her school in a day. The guidance counselor requested a meeting. I sat in a small overlit office across from a woman with too much perfume and not enough spine. She smiled gently and said, maybe Lila would benefit from reconnection. With her grandparents. Sometimes children just need to feel love even when the adults are hurting. I stared at her. This woman who had never met my mother, never seen my father fall asleep on the couch, while Lila cleaned up plates from a dinner she wasn't invited to, dared to lecture me on love. At home, Lila pulled out of everything she'd cared about. She dropped out of the district science fair even though she'd been building her presentation for weeks. Her telescope sat in the closet untouched. She spent hours alone in her room with loud music pulsing behind a closed door, drawing symbols on the glass with dry erase markers. I knocked. She didn't answer. My daughter was learning silence, just like I had years ago. One afternoon while cleaning, I knocked over a file of papers from her desk. An old envelope tumbled out. It read in clumsy handwriting, "Grandma and Grandpa from Lila." Inside, a letter creased unsent and heartbreaking in its simplicity. She had written about how hard she tried in school, how kind she tried to be, how much she hoped they'd be proud of her someday. That letter had never been mailed. She had written it, folded it, hidden it. I sank to the floor and cried, not for what was in the letter, but for what wasn't. For the hope she had folded down, sealed up, and buried. Later that night, Ethan sat beside me on the porch. He put an arm around me and asked, "Are you sure about this?" I nodded, looking out over the street, the bare trees shivering in the wind. If I stay quiet now, she'll think she's not worth fighting for. The call came just past midnight on a Thursday. Rain was tapping against the windows like fingers drumming a warning. The hospital asked me to appear before the ethics board at noon the next day. They used careful words: personal conduct, reputational harm, professional judgment. I arrived with a folder thick with evidence copies of mortgage payments, medication receipts, emails from Harold, a printout of the eviction letter marked with a legal stamp. I stood alone at one end of a long conference table. There were 9 people on the other side. Some I knew, some I didn't. Their faces were blank. One senior physician leaned forward. "Do you believe evicting your parents reflects poorly on the values we expect from a physician?" I kept my voice even. "I believe letting my child eat cold bread on Christmas night while 30 people laughed in the next room reflects more poorly." I handed over the financial documents explaining each payment made on the house, every medical cost that wasn't reimbursed, every monthly deduction from my account for their groceries, utilities, home insurance. I told them about Lila briefly, but truthfully. Then, an administrator placed a flash drive on the table. "We received this anonymously," she said. They loaded a video on the screen behind me. It was grainy footage. Lila walking out the front door of my parents' house. Her small shoulders hunched, her arms wrapped around a gift. Margaret's voice floated from somewhere inside. She came on her own. Nobody asked her. There was laughter in the background. Corinne's unmistakably sharp. No one spoke for a long moment. Then a board member cleared his throat and said, "This isn't an ethics issue anymore." After the meeting, they told me the investigation was paused. Not closed, not resolved, but paused. A second review would be scheduled. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't standing on trial. I was just heard. It wasn't a victory, but it was the beginning of not losing. Driving home, I kept my hands steady until my phone lit up with a message. From Corinne. "Congrats. Whole town knows you kicked your parents out. Must be nice to raise your daughter to be proud of that." I pulled over to the side of the road. My hands shook. Not because her words cut, they didn't. Not anymore. But because of the rage rising in my throat, how I wanted to scream it into the world. When I walked through the front door, the house was quiet. I found Lila in her room wearing her red sweater, the same one from that night. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, turning something over in her hands. She looked up. "Are you mad? I didn't say anything?" "At school, I mean." I sat beside her, pulling her close. Her hair smelled like shampoo and cinnamon. "No, baby. You don't need to protect me," I whispered. "That's my job. And I'm doing it. For both of us." 2 days after the confrontation at the hospital board meeting, I got a call I didn't expect. Rowan Wilder, an old college friend I hadn't spoken to in years, now a journalist with the Asheville Tribune, left a message that simply said, "Heard something in the ER. I think it's time people heard your side." Coffee. We met at a quiet cafe just off the Pisgah Trail, one of those places where time slows down and no one raises their voice. I came prepared, not just emotionally, but with folders and envelopes. I wasn't going to plead my case. I was going to state it. I laid everything on the table between us: the mortgage documents with my sole signature, Harold's unpaid prescription receipts, the heating bills, the certified eviction letter, the screenshots of Corinne's texts, vulgar, cruel, time-stamped, and finally Lila's letter, never sent, still sealed in the envelope she left on her windowsill. I said one thing: I didn't evict my parents. I evicted the shame they tried to suffocate me with. And I protected my daughter from inheriting it. Rowan didn't take notes. She didn't ask follow-ups. She just looked at me, eyes glassy, and said, "That's the story people need to read." The article went live 3 days later, Sunday morning front page, beneath a photo of a snow-covered swing set in a dim backyard. The headline read, "Doctor, Mother, Cold Toast, Christmas Eve." It spread faster than I imagined. Rowan wove my narrative, gently tracing not just the scandal, but the silences that came before, the quiet expectations, the unspoken debts, the emotional violence disguised as tradition. She quoted Lila's science fair speech. She fact-checked every document. At first, there was still anger online, but the target shifted. My name stopped trending next to heartless. It started trending beside resilient. Then came the ripple effects. The cafe Harold frequented stopped delivering to their address. The bookstore where Margaret loved to sip coffee declined to order the book she requested. Neighbors, once complicit in whispers, crossed the street to avoid them. And then the email came from an older cousin who'd reposted the eviction screenshot weeks earlier. The subject line read, "I was wrong." Harold and Margaret couldn't take the social frost. They fought with Corinne. Margaret called her house chaotic. Harold complained about the lack of decency. Corinne told them to leave. They moved into a third-floor rental across town, in a building where the heating barely worked and the stairwell smelled of mildew. Harold's prescriptions lapsed. One icy morning, he collapsed in the kitchenette. Minor stroke. He was admitted to the ER, the same one I worked in. Margaret showed up at my hospital that afternoon. She stood in the entrance and screamed my name across the atrium. Security came before I had to. "You're not human," she shrieked. "He's your father." A nurse beside me, fresh out of residency, still starry-eyed, whispered, "We save lives with our hearts, but we survive with our spine." I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just exhaled. For the first time in months, my chest didn't feel like a loaded freight. Later that night, I sat with Lila in the quiet corner of the waiting lounge. She was asleep. Her project plans rolled beside her, sketching turbines powered by heartbeats. I leaned back and closed my eyes. We were safe now. A week after the article, I was summoned to the hospital director's office. The letter was short and formal. I was reinstated. The investigation had been closed. My conduct deemed professional, appropriate, and above reproach. They even included an apology in writing. Back in the staff lounge, a few nurses gathered for tea and warm banana bread. One of them, who'd been stone-faced throughout the past weeks, hugged me quietly. "We owe you more than banana bread. But it's a start." Lila, meanwhile, had submitted her revised science project, The Regenerative Energy of the Human Heart, a model inspired by recovery, resilience, and pulses. The school rescheduled the district science fair after the snowstorm, and this time, she went. And this time, she didn't scan the crowd for approval. She just stood under the spotlight and presented clear calm, with a confidence that made me press my hand to my mouth. She won. She didn't look at me right away when they handed her the ribbon. She smiled first. At herself. That night, Beatrice came by. She brought oatmeal cookies, slightly burnt as always, and a folded note. I read it all, she said. And I realized I was too close to the fireplace to notice others were cold. The note was simple. "I'm sorry. For the silence." We talked that evening, not as niece and aunt, but as two women who knew what it meant to grow around damage. For the first time, we said aloud what we'd tiptoed around for decades. A month later, I sold the house. The old one. The one with walls soaked in quiet debts and invisible bruises. I bought a smaller cottage near the edge of Asheville. It had a porch that creaked in spring, and a backyard large enough for lavender and tomatoes. Lila picked the colors. Painted her windowsills yellow. One day, she looked around and said, "This house doesn't feel big, but it feels like ours." That Christmas we hosted dinner, me, Lila, Ethan from work, Rowan, and two nurses who had once given me the cold shoulder, but now offered warm cider and awkward apologies. We sat at a handmade table I found at a flea market. Nothing matched. Everyone brought something: roasted carrots, mashed potatoes, sparkling grape juice. Lila placed a plate of toast in the center, warm, golden, crisp. I laughed my chest tight with something like peace. And for once, no one fought for a seat. No one was pushed aside. Lila said softly, "We don't need their table anymore. We built our own." And she was right. It had space for everyone who showed up with truth, not titles. And in that kitchen, under soft lights and laughter, I realized something simple. I no longer remembered how many seats were at the old table, because this one had enough.